I speak to you in the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Please be seated. Life is unpredictable. I hope I'm not ruining anyone's day today. 1 minute, everything is going exactly as planned. And then out of the blue, things can change quickly. The world is similarly unpredictable. No matter how accurately the experts learn to predict natural events such as earthquakes, tornadoes, or tsunamis, some degree of uncertainty will always be associated with those events. Unpredictability is the way the universe works, and none of us knows how any of it will play out, which can cause peace to escape at every turn. So the good news I have the joy of proclaiming today is that no matter what is going on in our lives or the world, we can be at peace because God is for us and always working for our good. Portions of both our Old Testament and New Testament readings today are about people who are locked behind closed doors. For Noah and his family, God had placed them in the confines of the ark for their safety as he flooded the earth. Noah, his family, and many animals had endured being locked in that ark for about a year. God had instructed Noah when to go into the ark before the rains began, but he never told them when they would leave it. So it's understandable that after all that time, Noah and his family may have begun to experience some level of fear. Maybe he began to ask himself, where's God? Has God forgotten us? How much longer until we're free? In hopes of finding out, he dispatched a raven and a dove to check the status of the receding waters. First, he sent a raven, but it never returned. Then he sent a dove, and it came back after finding no place to rest. Perhaps the return of this dove caused a deeper angst among the ark dwellers. A week later, giving it a third try, Noah sent the dove out again, and this time it returned with an olive leaf. Olive leaves, or branches, are known to symbolize peace. In his goodness, God sent Noah a sign of peace. Things were still unpredictable because God did not give Noah a specific exit date, but he gave Noah something to remind him that God had not forgotten. Like, peace be with you, Noah. I got you. The day finally came when the Lord unlocked the ark door and they all stepped out into dry land. That very day, God made a new covenant with Noah that he would never flood the earth again. He established that he was for humanity and all creatures, and he placed a rainbow in the sky to prove it. The covenant did not mean all things would be perfect for Noah or his family now that they were back on dry ground, but it meant that they could leave the ark knowing they would not need to return to it. God promised that he was for them, and ultimately, that he is for us. The good news is that no matter what is going on in the world or our lives, we can be at peace because God is for us and always working for our good. In the gospel reading, the disciples were also in a locked room, but not because God had put them there. They chose to hide because they feared for their lives. Now, fear is a God-given gift, an inbuilt survival instinct. It makes us alert to danger and prepares us to deal with it. Feeling afraid is very natural and helpful in some situations. But fear that paralyzes action is not so good. The disciples seem to be suffering from paralyzing fear. After the resurrection of Jesus, the disciples have also come face to face with unpredictability. John tells us that they were hiding out of fear of the religious leaders. What were they afraid the religious leaders would do to them? In those days, the whole goal of being a disciple was to become like the person you were following, and they had been with and following Jesus for 3 years. And since Jesus had been crucified, there was a pretty good possibility that they could be next, as they were guilty by association. And to top it off, they not only had the Jewish leaders to contend with, the disciples may have each been suffering from a guilty conscience. For when the going got tough, they bolted and left their teacher, their friend, in the hands of his enemies. Would Jesus be upset that they had abandoned him in his most significant time of need? Perhaps the guilt of their choices filled them with regret and shame. There they were, terrified about what their future held, and sitting with the memories of their plans and promises of loyalty and faithfulness to Jesus. In spite of the news reported by several of the disciples that the tomb was empty, and regardless of the fact that a few of them had actually spoken to Jesus, did they go out rejoicing, proclaiming Jesus was alive? No, they freaked out and hid. Rather than holding on to the promise Jesus had given them earlier, that though he was leaving them physically, he would not leave them alone or leave them to their own devices, they gave in to fear. The good news is that no matter what is going on in our lives or the world, we can be at peace because God is for us and always working for our good. At our core, we all desire some level of peace. How would you finish this sentence? I could be at peace if. There are many answers to fill in the blanks as people in this room, and even more because we would probably be able to fill that blank with at least a couple of things that rob us of peace in our hearts. At times, peace can be entirely fleeting and impossible to hold on to for any length of time, but we still try, don't we? We reach for things that we think will give us peace, like food, shopping, or our phones. We convince ourselves that I can be at peace if I felt a little more secure for the future. I could be at peace if my family or spouse would do this or that. I could be at peace if I could just forget the past and move on. I could be at peace if I saw some noticeable improvements in my life. I could be at peace if my boss were nicer. None of these are bad or wrong in themselves. They actually sound pretty good. And we come by these desires honestly, because this is how our society conditions and trains us to believe about what it takes to have peace and to live a peaceful life. These ways of managing may give us temporary peace, but not the true soul-settling peace God desires for us. In the long run, the stressors in our lives may keep us from being at peace, causing us to succumb to fear and uncertainty. And like the disciples, we forget God's promises. Recently, I went on my first overnight backpacking trip with a group of ladies along the coast. The group guide informed us that no cell service would be available in that area. I kind of didn't believe her though, because there's cell phone towers everywhere, right? But she was correct. As soon as we hit the trail, nothing. All the bars on my phone were gone. The very thing that would keep me connected and at peace, knowing everything was okay back at home, was completely unavailable to me. Suddenly, there was some unpredictability, and the intruding thoughts began. The what ifs and how will they reach me if something happens type thoughts and questions started racing through my mind. I was in the midst of God's beautiful creation, yet feeling no peace. And this goes to show us the fragility of our peace. It doesn't have to be for a big reason that we lack it. For me, it was as silly as the lack of bars on my phone. The good news is that no matter what is going on in our lives or in the world, we can be at peace because God is for us and always working for our good. John tells us that as the disciples hid behind locked doors in fear, Jesus entered the room. We are not told how he got in. And more important than how he got in was that Jesus was there. He showed up, meeting them there in their current duress. At that moment, we can imagine a mix of emotions for the disciples: guilt or shame for leaving the scene at the moment of Jesus' trial, fear and confusion that he was suddenly there with them because Jesus, he had died after all. Of all the ways Jesus could have greeted them, he chose 4 simple words: peace be with you. When he appeared, he didn't bring up the painful events of the past few days. He didn't say, "Where were you guys when I needed you?" Or, "I can't believe you're just sitting here feeling sorry for yourself," or "Toughen up." He said, "Peace be with you." And because the disciples were human and he knew they might need proof, he showed them his nail-scarred hands and his pierced side. He gave them physical evidence that they were not having a vision or seeing a ghost. No, it was Jesus in the flesh, resurrected from the dead and standing before and with them. After their initial shock of seeing Jesus, they had great joy. It caused great joy among them. And partly because in saying, "Peace be with you," Jesus was saying, "I forgive you. You thought you were no longer my friends, but you are still my friends." Jesus repeats the words, "Peace be with you." This time, breathing the gift of the Holy Spirit into them, giving them spiritual evidence that despite their unknown and uncertain future, he was still on their side. And God's presence would always be with them. They could unlock the door and leave the confines of that room in peace to continue the task given to them by Jesus of spreading the good news of Jesus Christ and his kingdom. The good news is that no matter what is going on in our lives or the world, we can be at peace because God is for us and always working for our good. This gift of peace to them and to us is the assurance that when life overwhelms us, when we feel afraid, when we feel like we've let God down, when we feel inadequate and empty, when we look to other things to give us peace, we are not alone. In our times of uncertainty and fear, the Lord invites us to courageously move forward, standing on his word, because God, in his wisdom and power and grace, is always with us by the power of the Holy Spirit and is working for our good. Now, God could not promise an ending to all hard things on this side of eternity. He knows that persecution, suffering, sickness, and grief will continue for us in this broken world. In light of that, what do the words, "Peace be with you," mean to us? Among other things, they remind us that Jesus achieved the highest form of peace for us by his reconciling death on the cross. They remind us that the peace of God helps us face troubling circumstances without being swallowed up by anxiety and paralyzing fear. Jesus' words assure us that God stands ready to forgive and release us from guilt. and they remind us that we can allow God's peace to rule our hearts. For these words are a gift that give us a deep knowing that we belong to Christ and that He will never abandon us, because no matter what is going on in our lives or the world, we can have peace because God is for us and always working for our good. This gift of peace is not meant to be kept to ourselves. When Jesus breathed the Holy Spirit on the disciples, he said, "As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." The same goes for us as followers of Jesus. Theologian David F. Ford says, God's presence and peace are a home from which we go out in witness, love, and service. Peace is our home, and we can share that peace as peace spreaders. During Lent, we learned a great deal about what it means to be a person of peace and living life on mission. And just as Jesus sent his disciples into the unrest of the world at that time, he sends us into our world that is desperate for peace, a world filled with war and turmoil and political unrest, where we can participate in what God is already doing. Jesus sends us out to treat each other with the same mercy and love that he has shown us. It is a mercy that pulls down hostilities, unforgiveness, and prejudice. It is a love that empowers us to love each other and be at peace with one another. John 16:33 says, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Hear the words of Jesus to us today. Peace be with you.